So why is all this so important? We're really talking about the economic impact that an ASF outbreak would have. So Dr. Dermot Hayes and his team of economists in 2020 had redone what the impact of African swine fever would be in Iowa and in the United States. So Dr. Hayes and his team looked at two models. They looked at one model, which said after an introduction into the United States, what if we eradicated it in 2 years and had no incursions into feral swine? So looking at that, that caused what looked to be about a $15 billion loss to the industry and a minimal job loss due to industry contraction. The second model that he evaluated looked at the disease becoming endemic in feral swine and looking at the impact over a 10-year period. That stretched out to be a $50 billion loss to the industry and a loss of about 140,000 jobs due to industry contraction. And this really, both of these scenarios highlights the value of the loss of export. So on the first day of a recognized foreign animal disease outbreak, so that's for African swine fever, classical swine fever, or foot and mouth disease, we would lose our export markets. And today we export somewhere between 25 to 30% of the pigs that we produce get exported to other countries. So all that meat that would be produced would have to stay in the United States and be sold domestically. So obviously this would create massive oversupply and the prices would severely dwindle. This slide here looks at the spread of African swine fever, particularly the more common one in 2007. You can see it spreading rapidly through Eastern Europe into Western Europe and into the Asias in 2018 and 19. And then most recently in 2021, really getting close to the American shores by infecting the countries of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So African swine fever really started out in Africa in the early 1900s. And then in the 1960s and 70s, it did spread into some of the countries in Europe as well as into some of the countries in the Caribbean, but they were successful in eradicating the disease at that time. But in 2007, due to most likely infected pig meat material being fed to pigs either from airline waste or from shipping waste at a port in the country of Georgia, got into Eastern Europe and then got into Russia. And as the graphic that you just watched, really quickly now has been marching across Europe to the west, as well as getting into Russia, and then got into Asia in 2018 and 2019, spreading very rapidly through the Asian Pacific regions. And then, as we said, most recently into the countries of Dominican Republic and Haiti. So let's talk a little bit more about the Dominican Republic specifically. So in 2019, Dominican Republic and USDA started a cooperative surveillance program. Dominican Republic, really nowhere in the Caribbean had a lab that was capable of testing for African swine fever. So that country would collect samples on a quarterly basis. And then at the end of that quarter, they would go ahead and send those samples to USDA for testing of African swine fever. As they were getting ready to ship their quarterly samples in the June of 2021, they were concerned about some that were collected at the end of that month from some pigs that had clinical cases that were similar as would be described for African swine fever. So they tested those first, and sure enough, those turned up positive. Then as they went back and tested other samples from that quarter, they found others that were positive as well. And it doesn't appear to be that it was just a single introduction. Through some genetic fingerprinting and sequencing have been done, it looks like there may be up to 4 different African swine fever viruses that may be circulating in that country. Now, the country of Dominican Republic, there's a lot of shipping ports in that country. So there's lots of opportunities potentially for feeding of garbage. Garbage feeding is also a very popular way that pigs are fed in the Dominican Republic. There's some commercial production, but a lot of backyard production as well. And a lot of those pigs are fed via garbage feeding from resorts or from these shipping ports. So USDA is working with the country of Dominican Republic to try to depopulate with it, but they're having some difficulty kind of staying ahead of African swine fever. A lot of it is just due to trust and indemnity. Like I said, in the 1980s, they had African swine fever in the Dominican Republic, and at that time, they were successful in eradicating it, but that eradication program was really the army just coming in and taking the pigs and eradicating it that way. So they're trying to convince them that they're going to be indemnified, either given other pigs or potentially other livestock to minimize the threat of pigs getting reinfected. But the people who had pigs in the 1980s still remember that, how it happened last time. So there's certainly some trust issue there. As we said, the garbage feeding is very prominent. That's going to continue to be a potential source of new viruses as you get ships that travel from ASF infected countries and they're feeding, the potential pork scraps to garbage, and in the garbage being fed to these pigs. That's certainly going to be a risk. And then just the technical ability to be able to get that done across all these different, production types, from commercial producers down to a lot of backyard herds, just very difficult. So we can see here on the map why that's so concerning. You've got the country, this is actually called the island of Hispaniola. So that has got the country of Dominican Republic and Haiti. They've actually discovered the virus in Haiti as well. And really the boundary between those two countries is just a line on the map. So it's really one contiguous island. Where it gets to be concerning is you can see how close the tip of the Dominican Republic is to the island of Puerto Rico and to the other Caribbean islands. In the upper portion there, you can see the southern tip of Miami as well. So where that gets to be concerning potentially is for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and their close proximity to the Dominican Republic, because they are considered to be U.S. territories. And how the laws are written today by the OIE, and that's really the equivalent of the World Health Organization for livestock around the world, is if a country or any of its territories becomes infected with a foreign animal disease, that entire country is declared as positive. So the United States worked with the OIE to establish Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands under what's called a protection zone. In other words, that would essentially shield the mainland U.S. if Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands were to become infected from that. And the OIE was able to grant that status to the U.S. The only potential caveat with that is the acceptance and recognition of that protection zone will occur on a country-by-country basis. So there's been a lot of USDA action in Puerto Rico in efforts to keep the virus from coming over from the Dominican Republic or Haiti. They're in the process of establishing a diagnostic laboratory there in Puerto Rico that they can do all that testing. They've been doing working with the Customs and Border Patrol to increase the amount of inspections of both legal and illegal boat traffic, because we're only looking at about 70 nautical miles from the tip of the coast of Dominican Republic to Puerto Rico. So you have both legal and illegal boat traffic that happens across there. You're seeing a lot more increased inspection of licensed garbage feeding. So there's a lot of garbage feeding that happens in Puerto Rico. Now that's much more regulated as it is in some states here in the mainland US. So they're doing more inspections of those. Licensed garbage feeders have to cook their garbage to a specific temperature. Have to keep logs of that. The other thing that the government is doing, though, is they are starting to test swine from those establishments, testing them routinely for African swine fever as well. Until recently, Puerto Rico did not have any feral swine, but kind of due to the pet pig explosion, particularly the potbelly pig. And then when the hurricane hit in 2017, 2018, a lot of those potbelly pigs were released. Now Puerto Rico has a burgeoning feral pig population. So they're in the process of trying to accelerate a surveillance and removable process with that. And they're testing the depopulated feral pigs. And thankfully, so far, so good that all those pigs have tested negative. Other things that are being done, probably the number one way that our number one prevention method to keep the virus out of the mainland US are the Beagle Brigade. So here you see pictured here. You have a Beagle and their handler at all of the major shipping and international airline ports that come into the country. And really, they're trained to sniff out any agricultural products, specifically pork-related products. The problem with African swine fever is it's very resilient in the environment and very difficult to destroy. Now, it can be, if cooked at the proper high temperature, it can be inactivated. But in the process of curing hams or curing sausages, those type of processes are not sufficient to inactivate the virus. So actually, in many cases across the world, they think that's how